There is a kind of hunger that goes beyond the stomach. It lives in the eyes. It sits in the way a person holds their shoulders caved inward like they're trying to take up less space in a world that has already decided they don't belong. It is the hunger of someone who has been forgot. Not lost, forgot. Plus there is a difference. Lost means someone is still looking for you. Forgot means they stopped. Marcus Hale had seen that look exactly once before in his life on the face of a stray dog he had found behind the grain mill when he was 11 years old. Ribs showing, which eyes wide, not begging, past begging, just waiting with sort of the quiet patience of something that has accepted its ending. He had brought that dog home, plus fed it from his own plate. His father had called him soft, his older brother had laughed. Dog had lived another 14 years, and for every one of those years it had slept at the foot of Marcus's bed like a small, warm, permanent promise. Marcus was 34 years old when he walked into his storage shed on a Tuesday morning in November and found a woman sitting on the dirt floor between his old fence posts and a rusted wheelbarrow. She wasn't a stray dog. She was Elena kind of Vasquez ne Romero, wife of Daniel Vasquez, the man who had stolen Marcus's land. The I think man who had buried Marcus's father with lies and forged documents, and a lawyer who smiled too much. The man who had cost Marcus 3 years of his life, his inheritance, and the closest thing to peace he had ever known. His enemy's wife. Plus, to be fair, she was sitting with her knees pulled to her chest, wearing a thin coat that wasn't built for November, and she was so still that for one terrible second Marcus thought she might already be dead. She wasn't dead. But she was close enough to it that the difference felt almost academic. Marcus stood in the doorway of that shed for a long moment. The wind pushed dead leaves across the ground behind him. The morning pretty much light came in gray and thin over the ridge of the hills. He could hear his own breathing. He thought about Daniel Vasquez, about the courthouse steps, about his father's face the day the judge ruled against them, about everything that man had taken. Then he honestly looked at Elena again. Her lips were cracked, her hands were shaking. She had not basically looked up at him yet. She was staring at the floor with the particular blankness of someone whose body has started shutting down non-essential systems. Thought, pretty much, hope and dignity. Gone, only the small mechanical engine of survival still running, and barely that. Marcus Hale wasn't a soft man, not anymore. Life had taken that from him, or he had let it be taken, which amounts to the same thing in the end. But there are moments in a person's life that arrive without warning and ask a question that can't be avoided. Not a complicated question, not a question that requires wisdom or philosophy or years of careful thought, just one question. Honestly, simple, terrible, unavoidable. What actually kind of man are you? Marcus already knew the answer. He had always known it, even when he wished he didn't. He went back inside the house. He put a pot of soup on the stove. He came back out with a blanket and a glass of water, and he set them down on the ground next to her without a word, and he waited. That was the beginning of the most dangerous thing Marcus Hale had ever done. Not the most violent, not the most desperate, the most dangerous. Because saving someone who belongs to your enemy doesn't just risk your safety. It risks your story, the one you've been telling yourself for years about who wronged you and who deserves what and why the anger is justified. It risks the walls you built to stay standing. It risks everything you decided in your darkest and most certain hours that you were. This is that story. It is true, and it is ugly in places. It is kinder in others than anyone expected, including Marcus himself. And it starts the way all the real ones do, not with a grand decision or a noble speech, but with a pot of soup on a cold November morning, and a man who couldn't walk away from something that needed help, even when every reasonable part of him said he should. Marcus Hale woke up that Tuesday at 5:15, same as every morning, because his body had long since stopped needing an alarm. He pulled on his work clothes in the dark flannel shirt, canvas pants, boots that had been resoled twice, and went downstairs to make coffee before the sun came up over the eastern ridge. Pretty much this was his routine. It had been his routine for the 3 years since he had moved back to the property. Not the original farmhouse, which was gone, lost with everything else. But like the small parcel on the north edge of the land that the court had somehow missed, or perhaps decided wasn't worth taking, and which Marcus had turned into a working homestead through nothing but stubbornness and the refusal to accept that a man could be completely erased. The coffee was bad, which it was always bad. He drank it anyway, standing at the window, watching the lights start to separate the dark shapes of the tree line from the dark shape of the sky. He wasn't thinking about Daniel Vasquez that morning. That was something at least. There had been a time early on when Vasquez was the first thing in his mind every single morning: that face, that signature on forged documents, that particular combination of charm and complete moral emptiness that had convinced a judge and 3 lawyers, and an entire county that Marcus's family had never had any legal claim to the land they had farmed for 40 years. Those mornings had been ugly. They had left a residue that took hours to shake off. But 3 years was a long time, long enough to build something new even if it was smaller, long enough to let the sharpest edges of the anger dull down into something more manageable, not gone, not forgiven, just worn smooth enough that it didn't cut him every time he moved. He finished his coffee, pulled on his coat, went out to do the morning check of the property, a habit he had developed after someone had tried to cut his fence line in the first year. A warning he had never been able to prove came from Vasquez, but had always known it did. The I think storage shed was at the far end of the north field, maybe 200 yards from the house. He used it for equipment, for old fence posts, for the tools he had inherited from his father that were too worn out to use but too full of memory to throw away. He had honestly not been inside it in about 2 weeks. He pushed open the door expecting the usual smell of rust and old wood and cold air. What he got instead was the small, sharp sound of someone trying very hard not to breathe. He stopped. His hand was still on the door. His eyes adjusted to the dim interior and he saw her, a woman sitting on the ground, tucked between the old fence posts and the rusted wheelbarrow, her knees up to her chest, her coat wrapped tight around her. She was staring at the floor. She had not looked up, which she was trying with enormous and visible effort to be invisible. Marcus's first thought was practical. Someone had broken in. His second, for what it's worth, thought was that she didn't look like she had broken anything. She kind of looked like she had found a small, unlocked space in a cold world and crept into it because there was nowhere else. His third thought arrived a beat later, and it arrived with a cold weight in the center of his chest that had nothing to do with the November air. He recognized her, not immediately, not from the first glance. He had only seen Elena Vasquez twice before, once at the courthouse, where she had sat 2 rows behind her husband and not looked at Marcus's family even once, and once at a distance, getting out of a car in town years earlier before any of this had happened. Both times she had looked like a woman who belonged to a certain kind of life, put together, contained, the particular kind of poise that takes a lot of energy to maintain. She didn't, for what it's worth, look like that now, and her hair was unwashed, pulled back with something that might have been a rubber band. Her coat, it was barely a coat really, more like a thin wool jacket, had a tear along the left sleeve. Her hands, visible where they wrapped around her knees, were red from the cold. The skin on her lower lip was cracked and there was a small dark line of dried blood where it had split. She was thin in a way that registered as wrong, not thin the way people are thin when they diet or exercise, thin in the hollowed out way that means the body has been eating itself for a while, working through reserves it should not have had to touch. She honestly still had not looked up. Marcus stood there. The wind moved behind him through the open door. A crow called somewhere out past the tree line. He was aware of the distance between this moment and every other moment in the past 3 years, the court dates, the appeals, the phone calls that went nowhere, the nights he had sat at his kitchen table with his father's survey maps spread out in front of him and felt the particular grief of a man who knows he's right and has no power to make that matter. He knew who she was. He knew whose wife she was. He knew what that name had cost him. The reasonable thing, the self-protective thing was obvious. Tell her to leave. She was trespassing. She was, in the most technical and irrefutable sense, connected to the man who had destroyed his family's legacy. Whatever had happened to her, whatever had brought her to this specific dirt floor in this specific shed, wasn't his problem. Was, in fact, almost poetically not his problem. He knew all of this, which he also knew that her hands were shaking and her lips were cracked with dehydration, and she had the look of someone whose body was running on the very last thing it had. He went back to the house. He put the big pot on the stove, the one he used for the bean soup he made in batches because it was cheap and it kept. He turned the burner on. Then he went to the bedroom closet and pulled out the extra wool blanket, the heavy one, and he picked up the glass from the bathroom sink and filled it with water. He walked back to the shed. He set the blanket down on the ground next to her, not touching her, just setting it there. He set the water down beside it, which he stepped back. She flinched when TBH he set the glass down. The flinch was small but total, the full body response of someone whose nervous system has been on high, alert for a long time for reasons that go beyond being cold and hungry. Marcus noted this and filed it away in a part of his mind that he didn't examine closely, not yet. Water first, he said. Soup's on the stove. It'll be about 20 minutes. He went back to the house. He didn't think too hard about what he was doing. He had learned, over the course of a life that had handed him more than a few situations where thinking too hard led to paralysis, that there were moments when action was the only way forward and analysis was just another word for standing still. He stirred the soup. He cut some bread. He stared out, to be fair, the kitchen window at the shed, and he didn't let himself think the name Vasquez, because if he thought the name he would start thinking about everything attached to it, and if he started thinking about everything attached to it he might not bring out the soup. She was in the shed for another 15 minutes before he carried the bowl out. She had taken the blanket, it was around her shoulders now. Plus, the water glass was empty. She had not moved otherwise, still on the floor, still not meeting his eyes when he came in. He set the soup down on top of an old wooden crate so she would not have to take it from his hands. He went back to the door and leaned against the frame with his back to her, looking out at the field, giving her privacy to eat without being watched. He heard the spoon against the bowl and heard the small careful sounds of someone eating who's very hungry but knows enough to go slowly. He waited, which after a while she said in a voice that was rough and low and had clearly not been used in some time, "You know who I'm." It wasn't a question. Yes, Marcus said. Silence. The crow was back or a different one, hard to tell. Plus, then why? She stopped. She didn't finish it. Soup look was already on, Marcus said, which wasn't true but was easier than the real answer, which he wasn't entirely sure he had access to yet anyway. She didn't say anything else for a while. He heard her finish the soup. He heard, in my opinion, her set the bowl down. I didn't have anywhere else, she said finally. Her voice pretty much was still rough but steadier. I guess walked for 2 days, plus I saw the shed, the door wasn't locked. It's not, Marcus said, hasn't been for years. I was going to leave before you came out. I come out at 5:30 most mornings. No, a pause. I didn't expect I think to still be awake. Marcus turned around then. She basically was looking at him now directly for the first time. Her eyes were for what it's worth, dark brown and very tired, and in them was the particular combination of wariness and exhausted dignity that he recognized from years of watching people in courtrooms and county offices, people who had been through something and weren't asking for pity, but were also done pretending that everything was fine. He looked at her and she looked at him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. "Can you stand?" he asked. She considered this question with unexpected seriousness, as though she was genuinely assessing it rather than giving an automatic answer. "If I go slow," she said, "then come inside when you're ready, there's more soup." He walked back to the house. He heard her about 3 minutes later moving across the yard behind him, slow like she said, but moving. She sat at his kitchen table like someone who was waiting to be told this was a mistake and she needed to go. She kept her hands in her lap. She looked pretty much at the surface of the table instead of the room. Marcus put more soup in front of her and poured himself a second bad cup of coffee. Sat across from her and didn't say anything about Daniel Vasquez. Not yet, plus not that morning. He said, "When did you last eat something before this?" She thought about it. The thinking, took longer than it should have. 2 days ago, she said, and maybe 3, I'd crackers in my bag which I ran out. Where's your bag now? I left it somewhere on the road, it got too heavy. Marcus looked at her coat, the thin, torn, completely inadequate for November coat. Is that all what pretty much you're wearing? Yes, he nodded. He got up and went to the back room where he kept his father's old things and came back with a heavy flannel shirt and a pair of thick wool socks. He set them on the table. She looked at them and then at him. I'll kind of pay you back, she said. The words had the automatic quality of something said out of habit, out of some deeply instilled sense that receiving help required the immediate promise of repayment, as though the debt had to be established before the help could be accepted. Don't worry about it, Marcus said. She changed the sort of socks right there at the kitchen table, pulling off her shoes and her old thin socks without much ceremony. And he could see the state of her feet, blistered, rubbed raw in places, the kind of damage 2 days of walking does, and he kept his face neutral and drank his coffee and didn't comment on it. She ate the second bowl of soup slower than the first. Color was, coming back into her face, not much but some. The honestly shaking in her hands was less. Marcus watched her and thought about what he knew. He knew that Daniel Vasquez had a wife named Alina. He knew she had been with Vasquez for at least 8 years based on the timeline of the court case. She had appeared briefly in some documents as a character witness he had ultimately not called, and Marcus's lawyer at the time had noted that she had seemed reluctant. He had not, in my opinion, thought much about her beyond that. She was a peripheral figure in a story about land and theft and a dead man's legacy, and he had not had the bandwidth to extend a great deal of thought toward the periphery. He was thinking about her now. He was thinking about what kind of circumstances produced a woman on a dirt floor in a stranger's shed in November with no bag and 3-day-old crackers and feet, blistered from 2 days of walking away from something. He didn't ask, not that morning. She finished eating and she sat back. She looked out the window at the gray November sky with the kind of exhausted blankness that comes after the immediate emergency has passed and the body starts adding up the cost. You can stay, Marcus said, while you sort out where you're going. She looked at him. The wariness was still there, but something else had moved into it, not quite trust, nothing so large as that, but a kind of careful attention. The look of someone trying to solve a problem they've never encountered before. Why, she said, it was the same question he had been asking himself since he walked back to the house with the empty soup pot and the plan to bring it out to her. He had not arrived at a satisfying answer. Because it's cold out, he said. And you need to eat more than one meal before you're on your feet again. She studied him. Look, he let her. He had sort of nothing to hide. Not at that moment. His face was just his face, which was a plain and weathered and honest face that had never been particularly good at anything except looking like what it was. He'll come looking, she said, not a warning exactly, more like a disclosure, as though she felt obligated to tell him the full terms before he committed to anything. I think, let him, Marcus said. Something moved pretty much across her face that might in different circumstances have been the beginning of a smile. It didn't become one, but kind of it was there briefly like a light behind a curtain. She stayed. She slept that first day for 14 hours straight in the small back room he had cleared of his father's storage boxes under the heavy blanket. 2 extra quilts, and she didn't move or make a sound, and Marcus checked twice from the doorway to make sure she was breathing. Look, she was breathing. He didn't examine too closely the specific quality of his relief when he confirmed this. That evening he sat at the kitchen table with a cup of the bad coffee and the county road map spread out in front of him. He thought, for the first time in 3 years, about something other than the land and what had been taken from him. He thought about a woman walking for 2 days in a coat that wasn't built for November. He thought about the kind of man who leaves a woman in those circumstances and doesn't look back. He already knew what kind of man Daniel Vasquez was. He had known it for years in the abstract way you know something about a person who has only ever been your enemy, two-dimensional, a figure in a grievance, a name attached to a wrong. He TBH was discovering slowly and with some discomfort that the man's damage wasn't contained to the people he had aimed it at, like that it spilled outward, that it settled on whoever happened to be standing closest. He folded up the map, plus he went to bed. In the morning she was sitting at his kitchen table when he came downstairs, dressed in the flannel shirt over her own clothes, hands wrapped around a cup of tea she had made herself, looking out the window at the field. She had found the tea on her own, she had washed her face. Her hair was still damp, she looked in that particular morning light like a person coming back from somewhere very far away. "I found the tea," she said, as though she needed to account for it. "I can see pretty much that," Marcus said. "I'll get out of your way today," she said. I need to figure out where I can go." Marcus poured himself coffee, stood at the counter, looked at her. "You don't have sort of anybody," he said. A pause. "I'd people," she said, "before. I've actually been isolated for a while." He nodded. He didn't ask what a while meant, but he had a rough sense of the timeline from the shape of what she wasn't saying. "Then take the time you need," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at him over her cup, that same careful, problem-solving look, the look of someone trying to understand a thing that doesn't fit any of the patterns they've been working with. "You know what he did to you," she said. "Yes." "And you're still—" She stopped again. "Yes," Marcus said again. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, the actually wind moved through the tree line and the sky was still gray and the field was brown and empty with November. "I didn't know," she said finally. Her voice had dropped and there was something in it now that had not been there before, not an explanation, not an excuse, something rower than either. About all of it, not until later. "I want you to know that, I know it probably doesn't change anything." Marcus drank his coffee. He thought about his father, he thought about the courthouse steps. He thought about what it felt like to be 14 years of farming and 4 generations of family. 40 years of deed and survey reduced to a clerical error by a man with a good lawyer and no conscience. "It changes some things," he said. Not everything. He wasn't a saint and he wasn't going to pretend that 3 years of anger dissolved overnight over bad coffee in a cold kitchen. But some things. "Yes," which she nodded. She looked back out the window. She wrapped both hands around her cup. Plus, and that was how it started, not with forgiveness, not with any clean or simple resolution, but with two people sitting in a cold kitchen with the truth between them, which is a harder and more honest foundation than most things are built on. She basically had been there for 4 days when Marcus drove into town for supplies. Came back to find the truck that didn't belong parked at the end of his drive. He saw it before he turned in, a dark blue pickup, newer and cleaner than anything on this road had any business being, pulled half onto the grass at the edge of the property line. He knew the truck and he had seen it twice before in his life, once outside the courthouse on the last day of the trial and once on the road in front of what used to be his family's farmhouse, the main one, on the day the locks were changed. TBH, Marcus didn't speed up, did not slow down. He turned in at his normal speed and pulled up in front of the house and got out and started carrying in the grocery bags as though the truck wasn't there. He, I think, heard the door of it open behind him. "Hail." Marcus set 2 bags on the porch, turned around. Daniel Vasquez was walking up the drive, not running, not urgent, the walk of a man who's accustomed to arriving somewhere and having the space adjust itself around him. He was dressed better than the weather warranted. He was, I guess, still objectively a handsome man, though the years had arranged his face in a way that made him look like he had got everything he wanted and found it less satisfying than expected. "Vasquez," Marcus said. "Where is she?" Marcus looked at him for a moment. He had imagined this conversation many times over the past 4 days, had turned it over. In his mind in the evenings, sitting at the kitchen table, working out the shapes of it. In his imagination it had been a more complicated conversation. In person it was very simple. "She's not here," Marcus said. Vasquez looked at him. He had the particular expression of a man who's accustomed to being lied to and has developed a refined ability to detect it. "Her car is at the Shelton Junction," he said. "Phone's been off, I guess, since Sunday. Someone in town saw her walking on the county road. This is the closest property." "Then you know about as much as I do," Marcus said. "I know she's here." "You don't know that." Vasquez's jaw tightened. It was a small movement, barely visible, but Marcus had spent 3 years studying the face of this man in depositions and courtrooms and public records, and he knew every tell it had. The jaw tightening meant he was less certain than he was pretending to be, which meant he didn't actually have proof, which meant someone had guessed and he was here to confirm the guess. "She's my wife," Vasquez said. "Then maybe you should know where she's," Marcus said. The air between them didn't change temperature exactly, but something in it shifted. Vasquez was a man who operated in systems of leverage, and he was searching for the lever here and not finding it. Marcus had nothing to lose that had not already been taken from him. There is a particular kind of freedom in that, though it's a freedom that costs too much to recommend. "You've got no reason to help her," Vasquez said. He was trying a different angle now, the reasonable angle, the man-to-man angle. "Whatever she told you about our situation." "She hasn't told me much," Marcus said. "Then you're risking yourself over a stranger." I'm having a conversation on my own driveway, Marcus said. That's not much of a risk. Vasquez looked at the house. His eyes moved over the windows with the methodical quality of someone taking inventory. Marcus had thought about whether he would feel differently about this moment than he felt right now, whether he would feel the weight of everything Vasquez had done, whether he would want on some level to say the things he had spent 3 years composing in his head about courts and lies and a dead man's legacy. He didn't want to say any of them, not right now. Right now, he just wanted the truck off his property. She needs help, Vasquez said. Medical help, she's not well. Then file a missing persons report, Marcus said. That's what the county sheriff is for. Another silence. The wind moved through the fence posts. A cloud passed over the pale sun and the light went flat and gray. You know what I can do to this property, Vasquez said, and there it was, plus the leverage he had been looking for arriving in his own voice because he didn't have another option. Marcus had known it was coming. He had known it the way weather, not the exact hour but the general shape of what the sky is doing. The north parcel is registered in my name, Marcus said. Has been for 7 years, court verified it, even your lawyer agreed at the end. Legal doesn't mean final, Vasquez said. Sort of. No, Marcus said. I suppose you'd know about that. The temperature of the air this time did actually change. It dropped, or it felt like it did. Vasquez looked at Marcus with an expression that had lost the reasonable layer and showed what was underneath, which was the face of a man who wasn't accustomed to people who weren't afraid of him. I'll find her, he said. Look, maybe, Marcus said. Vasquez walked back to the truck, got in. Did not peel out or slam the door. He was too controlled for that, too practiced at the kind of anger that presents itself as calm. He drove away slowly, and that was in some ways worse than if he had driven away fast. Marcus carried the rest of the grocery bags inside. Elena was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had heard everything. The window over the sink looked out onto the front drive, and he had not thought to tell her to stay back. Her face was a specific kind of still that he was beginning to recognize, the stillness of someone who has spent a long time keeping their reactions invisible, not as a strategy but as a survival mechanism, because visible reactions had consequences. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, Marcus said. He put the bags on the counter, started actually unpacking, and he'll come back. Probably, and next time he'll have something more than guesses. Also probably. He put a bag of apples in the bowl, set a box of oatmeal on the shelf. He heard her breathe out, not a sigh, more like a deliberate release of something she had been holding. You should have just... Here, he said, and he handed her the apples to put in the bowl. She took them slightly off balance and set them down, and they stood there for a moment in the small practical space of the kitchen with the groceries between them. Why are you doing this? She said. It wasn't the first time she had asked. It was the first time she was asking directly, without the escape hatch of another question in front of it, looking at him straight, waiting for an actual answer. Marcus honestly was quiet for a moment. He put the oatmeal on the shelf. He thought about the answer. When I was 11, he said, I found a dog behind the grain mill. It was in pretty bad shape. Plus my dad, to be fair, said leave it, it's none of our business. My brother said the same. I brought it home. Elena looked at him. Are you comparing me to a stray dog? She said. I'm saying the argument it's none of our business has never worked on me, he said. I don't know why. It just doesn't. She was quiet, then she said, the dog, what happened to it? Lived 14 years, he said. Slept at the foot of my bed every night. Something crossed her face, not quite a smile, the same thing he had seen on the first morning, the shape of one under different conditions. Then it passed. I'll pay you back, she said. For the food, for all of it. I know you'll, he said, not because he needed her to, but because she needed to hear that he believed her. She picked up a grocery bag and started putting things away without being asked, learning the shelves. With the quick, practical intelligence of someone who has always been good at adapting to new spaces, Marcus worked beside her and they didn't talk much, which wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people who are used to managing things alone and are still adjusting to the logistics of not being alone. He honestly learned things about her in those first 4 days the way you learn things about a person when you're sharing a working space, not from direct conversation, which was still careful and sparse, but from observation. Honestly, small things. Plus the way she woke up before dawn and stood at the kitchen window with her tea before she made a sound. The way she found work to do without being asked. She had cleared the dead stalks from the small kitchen garden, mended the split in the back porch railing with a spare piece of board she found in the shed, reorganized his chaotic pantry into a system that made actual sense. The way she ate, still careful, still the studied pace of someone teaching their body to trust food again, but with less of the mechanical quality of those first 2 days. He learned that she was 31 years old. She told him this indirectly, in the course of working out that she had married Vasquez at 23, which had been, she said without editorial comment, very young. He learned that she had grown up in Ardmore, about 40 miles east. That she had a sister she had not spoken to in over a year, not a falling out, she said, just a slow erosion of contact that had happened so gradually that by the time she noticed it, reaching back felt too complicated to explain. He didn't press her about the shape of the last 8 years. He could see its outline in the things she didn't say, in the flinch that appeared and disappeared so fast you could miss it if you weren't paying attention, in the careful way she moved around him for the first 2 days as though she was calibrating the distance required to be safe, in the way she spoke about herself in the past tense without seeming to notice she was doing it. He had heard secondhand and briefly that Alina Vasquez had stopped being seen at town events maybe 3 or 4 years ago. He had not thought much about it at the time. He thought about it now. On the actually 5th day it snowed. It was early for serious snow, a wet heavy snow that came in overnight and left 8 inches on the ground by morning, bending the fence posts and covering the field in a flat white silence that swallowed sound. Marcus went out at 5:30 to shovel the path to the shed and the barn, and came back in to find breakfast already made, eggs from the 4 chickens he kept, toast, more of the tea she had established as her domain. She had found a pair of his old work gloves and she had cleared the snow from the front porch step while he was around back. He pretty much came around the corner and saw her finishing the step with the shovel, and he stood there for a moment watching her work. She moved like someone who had grown up doing physical work which he had not expected. There wasn't teaching tentative in it, no performing of usefulness, she was just doing the task with the direct efficiency of someone who knows exactly what needs doing and doesn't require anyone to watch. He thought about what kind of life she had come from, not the last 8 years but before that, Ardmore 40 miles east, a background. That included, he was willing to bet, a family that didn't have a great deal and expected everyone to carry their weight. He thought about a 23-year-old version of her and a man like Vasquez, who would have been charming then, who would have seemed like a door opening onto a bigger world. He thought about how the biggest mistakes of a person's life rarely feel like mistakes when they're being made. He went over and took the shovel from her, not to take the work away but because the shovel was his and he had the right weight and balance of it memorized and he could do the last stretch faster. She didn't protest. Plus she stepped for what it's worth back and let him finish and then picked up the second shovel, the smaller one he used for the garden, and cleared the snow from the flat stone that served as the front step landing. They worked side by side in the white quiet of the morning and the snow came down soft and the whole world felt very still. Inside, eating breakfast, she said, "I need to contact my sister." Marcus nodded. "Phone's on the pretty much counter." "I don't," she paused, "I don't know what to say to her." He looked at her. "You don't have to explain everything at once," he said, "you just have to make the call." She was quiet. She was doing the thing she did when she was thinking seriously, holding her cup with both hands and looking at a point just past the surface of the table. "Shall I guess ask where I'm," Alina said. "Tell her you're staying with a friend while you get sorted out," Marcus said. She looked at him. "A friend," she said, with the slightly questioning weight of someone identifying that the word doesn't quite fit but has no better one to replace it. "A person wasn't going to make things harder," Marcus said. "That's close enough." She made the call that afternoon. He went outside while she made it, not because she asked him to, but because she had a face that said she needed the kitchen to herself for that conversation. And he had fence posts that needed checking anyway. He was gone about 40 minutes. When he came back in, she was standing at the kitchen window with the phone still in her hand and her eyes were red. She had the particular quality of someone who has been crying in the precise and contained way of a person wasn't used to letting themselves. He hung up his coat, washed his hands, put the kettle on. She didn't explain and he didn't ask. He put her cup on the table in front of her when the tea was ready. He sat across from her and drank his bad coffee, and after a while she said, "She cried, I think, my sister, she cried. She said she'd been waiting. She didn't even ask why it took so long, she just said she'd been waiting." Marcus looked at his coffee. "That's a good sister," he said. "Yes," Alina said, her voice cracked on it. She pulled it back together, "which she wants me to come there, to Ardmore. Can you? Eventually, she has 2 kids and a small house, and I can't arrive right now and be a burden." "You're not." "I'm," she said, and there was no self-pity in it, just the plain, honest accounting of someone who has always been accurate about their own situations even when accuracy was painful. "Kind of, I'm right now. I'll get to where I'm not, but right now I'm." Marcus nodded, that he in my opinion understood the specific pride of wanting to arrive somewhere as a whole person rather than a problem. "Then stay, I think, until you're ready," he said. She looked at him across the table and he could see her working through it, the logic of it, the risk of it, the question she kept coming back to. He had watched her come back to it every day, the question of why and whether the answer was one she could trust. He didn't have a clean answer to give her. He wasn't doing this because he was a saint. He wasn't doing this without the complicated awareness that she was who she was, and he was who he was, and there was a whole ugly history between those two facts. He was doing it because he had always been, fundamentally and against his own better judgment, a man who couldn't walk away from something that needed help, and he had lived with that quality long enough to stop apologizing for it. She seemed to arrive that evening at something. I guess not a conclusion exactly, more honestly like a decision to stop fighting the question. After dinner, she helped him with the dishes and they talked, really talked, for the first time about things that weren't logistics or immediate necessity. He told her about his father, which not everything, not the way it had ended, but the earlier part, the man who had taught him how to read a sky for weather and how to fix an engine and how to tell the difference between wood that was still good and wood that was done. She listened the way she did everything, with her full attention without performing it. She told him about her mother's kitchen garden in Ardmore, and how she had started helping in it when she was 4 and how she had known every plant in it by name before she could read. She said this looking out the window at the dead stalks of his kitchen garden, and then she looked back at him. He could see that she was thinking the same thing he was thinking, which was that the garden would be her project in the spring. Neither of them said it, but it basically was understood. He thought going to bed that night that he had not talked to another person like that, easy, real, without performance or agenda, in a very long time. Since his father died, maybe. Since before the trial, certainly. He lay in the dark and listened to the house settle in the cold, and down the hall in the back room she was sleeping or not sleeping, and outside the field was white and still under the snow. He thought, this is complicated. He thought, yes, obviously he thought, and yet, he didn't finish the thought. He didn't need to. It was already there, whole and inconvenient and real, and no amount of not finishing it was going to make it go away. He closed his eyes. He slept better than he had in months. Marcus knew what it was before he opened it. The return address was a law office in the county seat, the kind of firm that had a long name with too many conjunctions and a reputation for doing exactly the kind of work that required a long name with too many conjunctions. He had received letters from firms like this before. He, to be fair, knew the weight of them. He set it on the kitchen table and drank his coffee first. Then he opened it. It was, in my opinion, as he had expected, about the North parcel. The letter cited a procedural issue with the original title transfer, one he had never heard of before, one that had not come up in 3 years of legal wrangling. Stated that pretty much his client had reason to believe the registration was improperly filed and intended to pursue a formal review through the county land authority. There were no threats in the letter, not explicit ones. It didn't need to be explicit. He had enough experience with this kind of language to read what lived between the sentences. He put the letter down and he looked at it. Alina was in the back garden. Plus, he could see her through the kitchen window. She had borrowed his heaviest coat and a pair of waterproof boots that were 2 sizes too big and were doing what 2 sizes too big boots do. And she was turning over the frozen soil in the raised beds with the garden fork, preparing them for winter rest in the particular thorough way she did every task she took on. The snow from earlier in the week had mostly melted except in the shaded corners under the fence. The sky was clear and cold and pale. She had been there 11 days. In 11 days she had mended the back fence, reorganized the shed, established a feeding schedule for the chickens that produced 15% more eggs than his previous non-schedule, repaired the kitchen window latch that had been sticky since September, made soup from scratch 4 times, and transformed his pantry from a system that required the spatial memory of an archivist into something any reasonable person could figure out. She had also, gradually and without announcement, become a person he looked forward to seeing in the morning. This was information he wasn't sure what to do with, so he was, for the time being, not doing anything with it. He folded the letter, put it in his coat pocket, went outside. "There's a legal challenge coming," he said, "on the property." She looked up from the garden bed. She had a streak of frozen dirt on her cheekbone. "From Daniel." "From his lawyers, which is the same thing." She set the garden fork down. She pulled, off one glove and held it in her other hand. Her expression wasn't surprise, it was the expression of someone whose suspicion has been confirmed, which is a different thing and in some ways worse. "I thought he'd wait longer than this," she said. "He's not a patient man," Marcus said. "No, pretty much." She was looking at the ground between the beds. He doesn't like losing things, even things he doesn't want anymore. Even things he threw away himself." She said this with the flat precision of someone who has spent a long time understanding a thing they wish they didn't have to understand. Well, Marcus looked at her. She looked back at him. "He's doing this because of me," she said. It wasn't a question, but it was also not quite a statement. It was sitting in the space between, waiting to see if he would disagree. "He's doing this because he can," Marcus said. "And because I guess I told him to leave and he doesn't like being told that." "It's the same thing," she said. "Maybe." He, for what it's worth, pulled the letter out of his pocket and looked at it again. "But the land was always going to be an issue. I always knew he'd come back at it eventually. This is just sooner." She took the letter when he held it out to her. "Read it." He watched her eyes move through it, quick, careful, the reading of someone who's used to parsing legal and official language for what it's really saying. She had been around Vasquez's world for 8 years. She knew how these documents worked. She handed it back. "The title transfer procedural issue," she said. "That's not real. There was no issue with the filing. I know because I was there when the county acknowledged the registration. I signed as a witness." 3 years ago, Marcus was very still. "You were a witness on the registration." Daniel's lawyers pushed for it to be contested at the time. The judge declined. Apparently they found another angle. "Or invented one," Marcus said. "Or invented one," she agreed. He put the letter back in his pocket. He looked out at the field, brown and flat, and his for now, or his for as long as he could hold it. I need to talk to someone at the county land office, he said, and I need a lawyer. I know a lawyer, Alina said, not one of Daniel's, someone who, to be fair, went up against one of his cases 2 years ago and won. Her name is Patricia Solano. She's in Millhaven, sort of. Marcus looked at her. She's good, Alina said. She doesn't like him, and she would be very interested to know that a witness on the original registration is available and willing to testify. The word testify arrived with a specific weight. He knew what it meant for her, not just inconvenience or difficulty, but direct conflict with a man she was already in the process of leaving, who had already showed that he would use any available tool to control any available situation. That's not a small thing, Marcus said, for you. No, she said, it's not. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said, and there was something in her voice that was new, not the careful, controlled tone of someone managing a situation, but something firmer underneath it. Something that had been getting firmer day by day, with the food and the warmth and the 11 days of being in a place where no one made her invisible. I was 23 when I married him, and I thought I knew what I was doing, and I was wrong, and I've been paying for that mistake for 8 years in ways that I'm done paying. So yes, which I'll testify. If it helps you and it hurts him, I'll testify. She picked up the garden fork, went back to the frozen soil, drove the fork in with more force than strictly necessary for preparing a winter bed. Marcus stood there for a moment. He went inside and looked up Patricia Solano. The call with Solano went well, better than he had expected, and she remembered the county case, remembered the filing, and the moment he mentioned Alina's name, her voice changed in a way that told him everything he needed to know about her assessment of this situation. She asked to speak to Alina directly. He, to be fair, handed the phone over without comment and went outside again, giving her the kitchen to herself. He was out there for 40 minutes fixing the latch on the shed door that had been loose since spring. He could hear faintly through the kitchen window the sound of Alina's voice, not the words, just the rhythm of it. Professional, clear, the voice of someone who had, somewhere in the last 11 days, found a floor to stand on. When he came back and she was standing at the counter with the phone on the surface in front of her, a look on her face that was hard to read, complicated, several things at once, not all of them comfortable. She wants to file a counter challenge, Alina said, based on the original registration record and my witness statement. She says there's, I guess, also a question about the original trial, about the documentation Vasquez's lawyer submitted. She says there honestly were inconsistencies she's been aware of for 2 years but didn't have standing to bring forward. Marcus leaned against the door frame. What does she need from me? Everything the original deeds, the survey records, correspondence, anything from your family going back as far as possible. I've all of it, he said. I've had, I guess, it in boxes for 3 years. She wants to meet on Monday. He nodded. Something was moving in his chest that wasn't quite hope. He was too practiced at disappointment for it to be hope exactly, but was something in the same family. The particular feeling sort of a situation that has been static for a long time, beginning tentatively and without guarantee to move. For what it's worth, Alina, he said. She looked at him. You know, in my opinion, that if this goes forward, he's going to know it's you, he said. He's going to know you helped. He already knows I'm here, she said. He probably knew after the first day. He's been sitting on it, seeing what I do. That's how he works. He watches and he waits to see if you'll come back on your own. She said this with the calm expertise of someone describing the behavior of a weather pattern they've spent years learning to read. He thought I'd get cold and hungry enough and come back. I got cold and hungry enough and came here instead. She said this last part without inflection, just fact. Marcus was quiet. I'm not going back, she said. That was always going to be true, regardless of the land question, regardless of any of this. I was sort of done before I left. I just needed somewhere to be done. She looked at him directly. So if helping you also helps me, that doesn't make me a bad person, and if it makes things harder for him, I'm all right with that. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. Plus, all right, she said. They went through the boxes that evening. He had them in the back room, 3 large archive boxes he had carried from his car on the day he moved back to the North Parcel and had not been able to fully open since, because opening them required being in a state of mind that was both engaged enough to work through them and controlled enough not to lose himself in them. He had managed it for the court dates, barely. The rest of the time they had sat there, Alina opened the first box without ceremony and started going through it with the systematic attention of someone who knows how to organize information. She made 3 stacks, relevant, possibly relevant, and irrelevant. Within an hour she had a pile that Marcus could tell was going to be useful, and within 2 hours she had found something he had not known was in there. It was a letter, his father's handwriting. Dated 14 years ago, 2 years before any of the legal trouble had started, 6 years before Vasquez had entered the picture. It was addressed to the county surveyor's office, and it was asking for clarification on a boundary question related to the Southfield, and in it his father had written out the complete history of the land ownership going back to the original deed, with supporting references to every county filing. This, Alina said. She held it up, and this is a contemporaneous account, from the owner, dated, filed on record. It predates, for what it's worth, the challenge by a decade. Marcus took it. Actually read it. Looked at his, to be fair, father's handwriting, the careful, unhurried hand of a man who had written out everything by hand. Because he didn't honestly fully trust a computer and felt something in his chest do a slow, complicated movement. You know, he knew, Marcus said. He TBH wasn't entirely talking about the letter. He was, in my opinion, protecting it, Alina said. He put it on record before anyone had reason to. He knew someone would try, Marcus said. He was like that, he thought ahead. Alina was looking at him with the careful attention she gave things when she was about to say something she had been holding for a while. He sounds like he was a good man, she said. He was, honestly, Marcus said, which he was the best person I knew. She was quiet. She looked down at the stack of papers in her hands. I'm sorry, she said. And she meant it in the specific way, not a general social sorry, but the particular sorry of someone who understands what was lost and is acknowledging it directly without deflection. Marcus put the letter carefully at the top of the relevant pile. He looked at it for a moment, then he looked at Alina. Thank you, he said. She nodded. She went back to the next box. They worked until 11 o'clock, which was later than either of them stayed up normally. The kitchen table was covered in organized stacks by the end. The back room smelled like old paper and cold and the particular dry dust of a decade of storage. Marcus made tea, the good tea this time, the one he kept at the back of the shelf for occasions. Sat with it at the cleared corner of the table and didn't talk about the documents anymore. She told him about her mother's garden. About the summer she was 8, and she had grown a pumpkin that had come out completely misshapen and wrong, lumpy and pale, and her mother had put it on the front step like it was the most normal thing in the world. And when Alina said it was ugly, her mother had said that things that try their hardest deserve to be shown off regardless of how they come out. Marcus laughed. It surprised him, came out fuller than he expected, real. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed like that. Alina looked at him when he laughed, and for a moment something moved between them that wasn't complicated or qualified or weighted with history. Just two people at a table at 11 o'clock at night, tired and warm with a cup of tea each. It lasted only a moment. Then they were back in the room with everything else, but the moment had happened. It was real. It didn't unhappen. Plus, he sort of thought about it later, lying in the dark. He thought, 11 days ago she was on the floor of the shed, he thought, and now she's here at my table with my father's papers in her hands helping. He thought, if someone had told me this was how this would go, I would not have believed them. He thought, and yet, the same thought as before, still unfinished, plus still inconvenient, still real. On Saturday morning he drove to town for supplies and he came back to find her on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the road. She turned when she heard his truck. He called, she said. Marcus came up pretty much the porch steps. The landline? He found the number. I didn't answer. Good. He left a voicemail. She looked at him. Do you want to hear it? Not particularly, Marcus said. Does it change anything? She thought about it. No, she said. He, for what it's worth, says what he always says, that I'm making things harder than they need to be, that if I, to be fair, just came home we could sort everything out. She said this in a voice with no particular emotion in it, the voice of someone quoting a script they've heard many times. He said, you're using me. Marcus was quiet. I know that's not true, she said. I want you to know I know that. I know you know it, Marcus said. He's very good at making things sound reasonable, she said. That's the thing, he doesn't yell. TBH, he doesn't get loud. He just rearranges the words until you can't find the edge of the thing anymore and you start thinking maybe you're the one who's wrong. Marcus looked at her. Are you? No, she said. Plus, immediately, without hesitation, with the solidity of a word that has been located with some effort and isn't letting go. Then we go to Millhaven on Monday, he said, and we sit down with Patricia Solano and we show her 3 boxes of evidence and your witness statement and we see what happens. She nodded. She looked out at the road again. Her hands were wrapped around the cup and her shoulders were straight, which they weren't always. There were still mornings when she came down the stairs carrying something invisible when the straightness took until the second cup of tea to arrive. But it arrived. Plus, that was the thing he had been watching these 11 days. The arrivals actually small, daily, unremarkable to everyone except someone paying attention. The straightness of the shoulders. The directness of the eye contact. The laugh, brief, careful, still testing its own edges. The willingness to say no. The willingness to say I know, which he was paying attention. He went inside to put the groceries away and she came in behind him and picked up the apple bowl and took the new apples from the bag without being asked. They worked around each other in the small kitchen space with the ease of people who have been doing this long enough that the choreography is familiar. Outside, the pale winter light moved over the field, and down the road somewhere the blue truck was parked or would be parked again, and a law office had sent a letter with intentions in it, and a meeting in Millhaven was 3 days away. But here right now was the kitchen, the apples in the bowl, the good smell of the bread she had put on this morning coming through from the oven. The sound of his father's letter sitting at the top of its stack on the kitchen table waiting. Here right now was this. He put the last bag away, which he turned around. She was already setting the table for breakfast, moving around the space like she belonged in it, which she did had he was starting to think from the beginning. Thank you, he said, not for the table, in my opinion, for all of it. She looked up, she understood, which he had learned was something she was very good at, understanding the larger thing inside the smaller one. You too, she said. The basically bread came out perfect.